So second.
Moved and second to adjourn. Laura, would you call roll?
Trustee Good?
Yes.
Trustee Law?
Yes.
Trustee Rhodes?
Yes.
Trustee Lichtenberg?
Yes,
Trustee Howell?
Yes.
Trustee Smith?
Yes.
we're adjourned.
Thanks.
Oh, you got the
Quick.
gavel out.
Yeah, see that?
Now we do budget.
Quick. Break.
Anybody, yeah,
Some things we don't talk about a whole lot, but it's come up a lot in like our finance committee and MGB about our cash balances. And I think it's important that we look at some of this in the supplemental information. These are some of our other funds and accounts. And I'd like to start with the Campus Life Bookstore funds. So this is a system with 4 separate funds. We have the bookstore, food service, residence hall, and the student union. And the student union is funded by a fee. The expenses out of there are for the maintenance of the building and the utilities, that type of thing. And you notice that it's has a revenue under expenditures estimated for this year at $173,000. So in the tuition and fee proposal that you approved tonight, there was a $1 per credit hour fee going to the student union. That'll help get that out of the red quite so much. The food service and residence hall, we try to get those to break even. So you accepted the rates tonight, and they were based on keeping this pretty much break even for these 2 funds together. The bookstore, you can see we're estimating about $89,000, almost $90,000. The bookstore used to bring us in $400,000 or $500,000 a year. We've made significant changes in the price structure and the implemented some programs for our students to pay much lower fees for their books. So the bookstore is sort of transitioning from a profit center strictly to a student service. So I think it's, you can see that we still have pretty good balance. We're estimating to be almost $4 million. We have used bookstore balance in the past to renovate both the El Dorado and the Andover bookstore and contribute some of that $1 million towards the 5,000 building. So I'm just going to move ahead. I know, if you have questions or comments, just hop in and stop me. Next, I'd like to talk about some of our what we call designated funds. The designated funds are actually part of our general fund. So the term designated means that it's a designated portion of our general fund. And we don't include those in the operating budget, the main budget that we're going to look at that we call the operating budget. So starting on page 11 of your book, this is the program development fund. This is for academic program development. And if you look at this, we haven't made any change since between November and March. So this is the estimate for the current year. We do get a transfer from the operating fund of $100,000. No, excuse me. We normally get transfers from the operating fund. This year, because we felt a lot of pressure on the budget when it was developed last August, we're actually transferring some funds back from the program development fund to the general fund, this $100,000. We still think they'll end up the end of the year with about $250,000, unless Lori and her team come up with some need that would go, that we would use money from this fund for. The next designated fund is the facilities fund. We transfer money over here almost every year. Again, in the sources of fund, you can see the big source is a transfer of almost 300,000. So we transfer money over here each year to help with our deferred maintenance needs. So we have about 800,000 in our total sources, and that includes the cash carryover, beginning unencumbered cash of about 450,000. And so I won't go through this, but if you want to take some time, this is sort of our expenditure plan. There are a lot of maintenance items here. And again, we transferred some money back to the general fund because of pressure on the budget last August. The next designated fund is a technology fund. And this is a fund that we use to help with IT. Bill Young's not on the call right now. He had something else to do. But what we allow is when there's unspent budget from the IT area, we allow them at the end of the year to transfer it into this fund that they can carry over. They have a lot of large needs, equipment needs, and ongoing contract needs. So that's what this fund is for. You can see some of the planned expenditures here. And right now, we expect to carry over about $700,000 in this designated fund at the end of the year. One more, which is a large designated fund at times. Right now it's not, and that's the capital project fund. And the real capital project fund is this portion right here. And our fund balance right now is $1,000,003. We're going to see if we have any more needs in the any more expenditures in the 5,000 building, and some of this money will go towards the IT project in the 100 and 200 building. So I don't have all the details on that. I think Kim Sherwood's going to tie this all out here in a month or two when we get it finished up. This portion up here was from the bond proceeds. We had about $8 million. So altogether, we had about $15 million between these two sources for the 5,000 building. And here's the expenditures to date on the 5,000 building, almost at 15 million. One other area in the designated funds, it's back up here. Let's see. Yeah, on pages 1 and 2, this is all in the supplemental section, by the way. I should have said that if you were trying to follow along. It's a section behind that green sheet in the book. And we have a lot of, different accounts that have been set up over the year where we allow the balance in this fund to be carried over at the end of the year. The revenues come from a specific source. Sometimes it's a fee we charge. You can see a lot of fee funds in there. Again, a lot of fees. And the expenditures are for a specific, relate specifically to those revenues. So we account for those. We do allow them to carry over a balance. You can see the Secretarial Center has a fairly large balance. I won't go into any more detail on that. I know we are pressed for time tonight, but I did want to show you that this is all general fund money, but it's designated. So when we look at the operating funds, we don't, these funds are not included. So just to kind of tie that back, I'll go up to the actual operating budget, which is what we generally talk about in the work sessions. And I'd start off with the notes here. There's just a little summary of the credit hours. You can look at that. You know, we've talked about using 142,000 estimate for this year. Right now, this budget is based on 142,000 hours. So again, maybe a little background on what we see. The purpose of this budget update is to give you a snapshot of changes that have been made during the year. You know, in August, we have a lot of assumptions. Some of those things become more clear during the year. With the March update, where we are right now, we're really setting the stage for decision making at the administrative level and at the board level between now and July, when we have to finalize the budget and the mill levy. So in the local taxes, I sent you out a correction to this sheet. Shelby had the keen eyes to notice I had a typo here showing the 21 and 22 mill rate at the same level it was at 20. These rates are both 16. The actual rate for 21 and what we're estimating for 22 are making an assumption right now for 22 that we will maintain that rate there. We don't talk about the capital outlay mill levy in this, when we talk about the operating funds, so it was separate, but in 21, the budget you just passed was the last year for the capital outlay levy. It's going to sunset and it won't return unless somebody wants to make a motion to try and reinstate that. I asked Shelby if he'd like to do it, and he declined to do that.
I laughed really hard first. I didn't know you were so funny.
I'm not really.
What?
No.
So on compensation, last year we didn't give any raise. The health insurance increase was somewhere around 6%. What we've put in, and we call this a placeholder at this time, and Terry Sater wanted us to make sure that we told you it was a placeholder because they may not feel that 2.5% is adequate. We usually tell the board it's a placeholder just in case you think 2.5% is too much. We know that this is something that has to be negotiated, but we felt that it's prudent in the past whenever we feel the budget that we have a possibility to give a raise of putting in a placeholder there so you can see what it looks like with an amount in there. We know that there are different ideas about what that should be in the end. The health insurance, we could go into this more and Shelley could give you some explanation, but right now I think it's probably suffice to say we think it would be about 12% if we, and that would be based on what Blue Cross Blue Shield is telling us right now, and the college picking up about 80% of that, and the employees picking up the other 20%. We're also probably going to be talking to you about a possibility of doing a self-funded insurance. We would have to take some of our unencumbered cash and set that aside as a designated fund for that. So again, I'm assuming you don't want to take time to go in that in a lot of detail right now, but did want to tell you that was something on the horizon. Then in the notes, I put in this, I always try to put in here what the operating funds are. It's the general fund and the PTE fund, what we used to call a vocational fund, but we don't include all these designations. And I hope that explanation of why we do it this way is satisfactory. And if you ever want to spend more time on that, if you want to do it now or later, be happy to spend more time on that. My sense is that you probably want to move on so we can look at the numbers and not stay too much longer. So I'll just run through real quick and highlight. This is on page 3. This is our revenue summary for the current year. Back in August, we had estimated about a 10% decrease, I think, in tuition and fees. We upped that somewhat in the November estimate. When we got through the first semester and got our numbers from the, 20th day of the spring, we raised our estimate again up from like about 139,000 to the 142. That helped increase our revenue on the student sources. The other thing is our online courses this year really took off. I think most people attribute that to obviously the pandemic, but that helped us out. That will go away when we instituted the new technology access charge. As we went through earlier in the meeting, the online course fee will go away for next year. And you'll see that when we look at the 22 revenue budget estimate. State sources, we were estimating a 10% decrease. For the current year, we're going to get funded at 100% of what we were told back in July by the KBOR. So we're adding that back to our revenue estimate to get us up to the amount we started with way back in July. On the local taxes, you know, we've raised this back up somewhat in August, and we carried that forward to the November estimate. We thought we were only going to collect about, normally we collect about 93% of the taxes that you levy in for the year. We thought that would go down by 7 or 8%. It actually only went down by about 3 or 4%. So we're able to add back some of that revenue for the current year estimate, almost $500,000. So those are big changes for the current year. We're actually adding back $2.5 million to the current year revenue estimate. So the next page, what we're doing here is comparing the current year estimate. These are the numbers that I just went through right here in this column that says March 9 under 21. And then we're estimating and making assumptions for next year's budget. And that's what you see here in the 22 column. I won't go through the tuition and fees. We've talked a lot about that. But overall, we're estimating about $300,000 more. The numbers that are in here for the tuition and fees are based on the recommendation. So we will go back and add that $2. And depending on how much we think that the revenue will either stay the same or go back with that $2 increase, if this number will raise right here. Going back to Shelby's question during the tuition and fee discussion, what our team had determined on that option was that we had left the 142,000 credit hours in the original recommendation, and that we thought about not only the amount we were lowering the tuition and fees, but the amount that the technology access charge was going up. So we did not put in any kind of what we call that elasticity factor. But when we added the $2 on the option, we did take an elasticity factor. And so we decreased that amount of revenue by 640 credit hours. So when we go back in, we'll need to redo the budget for that additional $2, and we'll bring you back an estimate later to look at as we go through the rest of the year, towards the end of the year. The operating grant, we are being told that to expect a 2% decrease in the state operating grant next year. So that turns out for us to be about $360,000. So we're building that into the 22 budget. The ad valorem tax, or excuse me, the local sources, there's three things that make up this increase. We're looking at the increase from where we were in November, what we were estimating, to what we're estimating currently. Again, I touched base on that. In November, we thought, or excuse me, this is the what we're estimating now for the 21 year. For next year, we think we'll get back to the 93% collection on the ad valorem tax. This year it was based on 89%. And that's based on the actual payment that we got in January from the county. So we think that'll go back up to the normal collection percentage. That's what this 800, well, that's part of the 877. The other thing, two things are, we've built in a 3% valuation increase estimate, and we're assuming that the mill levy will stay at the 16 mills. And so we've built in no decrease for a mill levy. We've built in an increase for valuation, and we built in an increase to get us back to the normal collection percentage for next year. The other change you see down here at the bottom is transfers. We did transfer some money into the 21 year, the current year. I mentioned those a little bit. Those were from the designated funds, again, to try to alleviate some of the budget pressure we were feeling back in August. So that was a one-time influx of $350,000 to the revenue, which we had to take out to get to the assumptions for next year. Questions, or do you want me to plow right through this?
Ken, quick question. So the additional COVID stimulus dollars that may be coming in, are those reflected in any of this, or is that just going to be sort of extra money, found money, so to speak, from a budget standpoint?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and thanks for reminding me of that. We had specifically talked in our planning about talking about that. None of those funds actually show up here. We treat those back in the supplemental section. There's a section on what's the term? Anyway, the reserve funds, they're restricted funds. The general fund is an unrestricted fund. Those monies do go back there and in the restricted area, and they have to be accounted for separately. We can't use those really to supplant general fund expenditures. We're hoping that the guidance that comes out on the new CARES money, there are different names for it, HERF money, CARES money, CRISA money. We're hoping that the new regulations that come out will give us some leeway to either reimburse ourselves for lost revenue or find some kind of creative way to help students that could help our enrollment. And I don't know, again, Dr. Curl, if you want to take any time right now to kind of talk to that.
Well, again, the guidelines are really still fluid. Those dollars can't just be put into the operating budget and be used. We can't just say we'll use these for this need within our budget. They're giving us guidelines on how we can potentially cover revenue losses and really specific things, but they have to be very tied to COVID related stuff. So
I guess what I was thinking was, is it giving us money for things that we haven't yet spent that's going to be designated expenditures? Or is it giving us money for expenses we've already incurred that we've justified meet the, whatever the guidelines are, in which case,
We don't know.
okay.
The simple answer is we don't know. One of the things that they're talking about now is the potential, well, in this CARES 2 money that came to us, we can go back and have not administrative employees, but other employees fill out time and effort forms from January to this point and then on. If they can designate and identify the portion or the percent of their salary that their time that they've spent on COVID-related activities, we may be able to take COVID money to replace that salary, those salary and benefit dollars that we've spent on those people, and use those salary and benefit dollars for some other need. But there's, it's complicated. So, we're waiting for additional guidance.
Yeah, that what Kim just mentioned there about using the fund to pay ourselves back for those salaries, that could amount to several $100,000 actually, because our security, our police force, we're going to be able to count 100% of their time. Our student health services, we're going to be able to count 100% of Jamie's time. So that could mount up fairly quickly. And, we were able to reimburse ourselves last year when we went on COVID and switched all our students to online. We didn't make them pay for the online fee, and we checked with our auditors to make sure this was okay, but we were able to actually reimburse the college about $700,000 for those fees that we waived for our students. And so that money, when we look at our unencumbered cash, that money's in our unencumbered cash and has helped to get it up to the point where it is. So there may be some opportunities like that in the future. On the expenditure side for the current year, we just had to make a few changes. These are mostly, like this is a correction for the Roger Matthews lawsuit. We had that somehow get into the budget on a one-time basis. It got in there twice, so we had to take it out. There's a small correction for the coach's budget. And then there are certain estimates that we make at the beginning of each year. On our part-time, our adjunct and our overload salaries, we look at those throughout the year, make an estimate at the beginning of the year. And so it's down. It probably relates back to our credit hours being down from last year. The employee benefits, we think the main reason we're going to be able to reduce that budget this year by this $250,000, it appears that we don't have as many people on our health insurance plan this year. So that was the biggest part of that. And then our scholarship expense, again, we make an estimate of that at the beginning of the year, look at it in the fall and the spring, and we believe it's going to go down by about $300,000. So we were able to reduce the current year expenditure budget by $900,000 roughly. Now for next year, what we've put in the budget right now is the placeholder that we talked about for a 2.5% raise, approximately $800,000, 12% on health insurance, approximately $688,000. This payroll market equity adjustment is what we're trying to do for the ops staff to get them up in certain areas to a market value. I think we've talked about that quite a bit in the past. Some of the other changes, when we added the $300,000 up here for the scholarship expense, we know some of that is from athletes who are not taking the full scholarship this year, and that relates back to COVID, where the NJCAA rules that they didn't have to take a full 12 hours. So we're going to have to add back some of that reduced scholarship expense. When we raised the tuition, that raised the scholarship expense. And then these items here, the president's car down to the foundation reimbursements, these were things where we reduced the budget, or in the case of the foundation, they made that much of a contribution by actually the college typically funds 130,000 of their salaries. The foundation paid for this during the 21 year. So these were one-time expenditure reductions for 21 that'll have to be added back to the 22 budget. And then the only other change is the technology infrastructure. This amount, 220,000, was added when we created the technology service fee that you approved earlier. So there are about 2.3 million that we're increasing over the base budget, which is the 21 budget. So going back to the summary sheets, for the current year, 21, back in November, we were pretty pessimistic at that time. We were looking at the revenues being under our expenditures by $3 million. And one other change we made at that time, we were looking at a 2% unspent budget. We talked to you a little bit about this when last time when we were talking about the furloughs, that we thought we could raise that estimate up to 3% unspent budget. So that takes our actual budget and reduces it by 1.5 million to what we think we will actually spend. So this is our current year budget, what we're asking you to approve, which is down 900,000 from what you approved in November. And then we think we'll underspend that by $1.5 million to get to this many actual expenditures, almost 49 million. On the revenues, so again, going back from the revenue sheet we looked at earlier, we now think that the revenues will be over the expenditures by 843,000, bringing our unencumbered cash up to almost 10 million, the 9.9 here. So it's been the target or goal of the board for many years that our unencumbered cash right here be 10.5% of our expenditures. 10.5% of our expenditures is actually 4.6. So for our operating funds, we think we're going to end up the year, if all our assumptions would be right on the nose, we would end up with $5 million in excess of the targeted amount. And I think I'm doing that backwards. The target amount is the 5.3 and the excess is the 4.6. I'm trying to hurry here. So going into next year, and again, this is something that everybody needs to be aware of. The faculty will say we have too much cash and they'll want more for raises. We know we have a lot of facilities needs. We want to look at the health insurance to see if it makes sense at this point in time to look at self-funding. So those are all items that relate back to the unencumbered cash and the excess unencumbered cash.
And Kent, this is Shelby. I've had a couple taxpayers yell at me about that too. Like, hey, that's above your 10.5%. So that's one more group of people looking at that.
And I should have said that, but I guess I kind of thought it would go without saying maybe.
Yep.
But you're absolutely correct. I know you hear that, and you're not the only trustee that hears it. So that is something that we recognize and we talk about at the administrative level. So for next year, right now, we're looking at a deficit budget of $1.3 million. But we at least have a cushion right now. So, that sort of summarizes where we're at in the operating budget. Again, I know it's late. I tried to be quick on this. But again, I'd like to go back to the premise of why we like to give you a budget at this point in time. It's to sort of give you as the trustees, but also we as the administrative team, a reference for moving forward with the decision-making and planning processes that have to take place over the next 3 to 4 months. And I think I'd close it there and see what other comments or questions there are.
That was very informative.
You
Thank
did such a
Appreciate
good
it,
job,
Kent.
Kent. There aren't any questions.
Well, as you spend some time on it and think about it and you have any next month, we'd be happy to get back with you. And if you funnel them to Shelby or Doug, they can bring them to the Finance Committee.
Oh, yeah.
And Mary Martha sat in with us today too. So,
Kent, thank you very much.
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, everybody that's still online. Appreciate you all. Are we done?
There's
Yeah, there's
Bill.
Bill.
Hey, Bill.
Move to adjourn the work session.
I don't think
I
it's
think we
even,
need a
yeah.
motion.